Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Guild of Inquiry. I'm your host, Joshua Void, and tonight we're going to have a fantastic guest. Actually, we got two guests coming on to the show tonight. Our first guest is going to be Steve McRae, who's going to come on and he's going to talk to us about what is this new atheism TM? What does that mean? How can we define that in a sense? And what is the problem with new atheism TM? And another individual is going to join me as well, and that's going to be James Apperson also. And he's going to come along and really help flesh out this idea of what new atheism is and why McRae might have certain issues with the new atheistic movement. But before we do that, if you like the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. We would really appreciate that. So thank you very much. Now, before any further ado, if West wishes to pop up our two individuals. Nice. Welcome, Steve McRae, and welcome, James Apperson. How are you both doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. It's been a busy day today, but here I am. Coffee. Getting my energy level up.
Yeah, I can definitely tell that's not decaf.
No, it's not. No.
Oh, definitely.
That's sacrilegious, man. Decaf coffee.
Facts.
Exactly. Okay, so let us jump into the topic matter at hand. What is new atheism TM? What is this? Actually, let me just pass it to you. What is new atheism TM?
Well, the term new atheism TM came from a Reddit group. I don't remember which one it was, but basically they were trying to identify a particular subset of new atheism, which, as you have it on your thumb, was the Four Horsemen: Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and Christopher Hitchens. But they're trying to identify a subset of that group that kind of adhere to the model of new atheism by going after Christianity, which was established after 9/11. It was a pushback to the Islam movement that was happening during the time, and the anti-Islam, because obviously after 9/11 there was a lot of Islamic phobia and things of that nature, and new atheists kind of hopped on that movement to try to give pushback to religion. But new atheism TN was them trying to identify people in that movement that were acting just like religious fundamentalists. They were acting just like creationists. They were using the same type of rhetoric, the same type of fallacious argumentation. And so that TM was basically a kind of a comedic thing to say, oh, look, they're, a special group, right? Trade these TM people that are just the same as fruit on the ground creationists. And so I went one step further. I kind of enumerated what I thought were some of the properties of new atheist TM. And I did send that to Wes, and he has that my list. If he wants to show it, I can just read it, go through them. But it was just basically a group of people that literally were doing the exact same thing they were trying to fight against.
Interesting. So you're saying that new atheism TM were individuals that were truly trying to, fighting religion in a sense, was kind of using a pseudo-religious doctrine in a sense.
Correct.
That pushed against the religion, but at the same exact time was trying to, I guess you could say, purify atheism in a sense. Or
yeah, well, they were trying to again. One of the tenets of new atheism is mockery, and I understand that to some degree. I'm not against mockery of certain bad ideas. Look, I mock flat earthers all the time, right? But Christianity, you got to remember that's 2 billion people. This is not some small group of people, or even 3 billion people. It's not some small group of people that just don't understand fundamentals of science, right? Flat earthers mostly, I believe, are pose. I don't think a lot of them actually believe their own BS, but I mean, even the ones that do, they're all scientifically inept. We think everybody would agree upon that. So there's a mockery to be had. I get that, but unfortunately, what you run into is when you have people that really want to talk about the dialogue and want to have the conversations, and you're only out there going, oh, you believe in a sky daddy, you believe in a sky fairy. Well, anybody can do that. It doesn't take any understanding of the topics to do that. It's Basil, it's Pearl, it's Jejune. It is so bottom of the barrel that I just have no want or need to have any kind of conversations with those types of people. And then they go one step further and they start using these fallacious forms of argumentation because they are not versed in any kind of basic logic or how to actually do rhetoric properly. Like Christopher Hitchens, who was a rhetorician, he was a very good one. Some things I didn't agree with him on, but for the most part, the man knew how to debate. I mean, he had some brilliant comebacks. Right.
But the one thing that I would like to state, though, is that I think because with atheism, or at least the atheistic umbrella, right, there's a lot of different subgroups within that group in and of itself. And I think, just like how you stated, there are certain atheists that are really trying to regiment atheism in a sense. They're trying to put atheism within some sort of regimented, how can I say it?
Structuralistic or formalism?
Exactly. It's like, thank you. That's perfect. But the thing is that at the same time, I think that there are certain atheists that are trying to spread away from that and that are doing their own thing and still allowing for other individuals to have a certain amount of autonomy with their thinking, in a sense, so that they're not regimented in the way that, let's just say, the larger group is trying to.
There is, but they're far and few between. Unfortunately, people don't seem to get the fact that just because you don't believe in God doesn't make you a critical thinker. And there are people that are just as much indoctrinated by watching the groups like the Atheist Experience and the Atheist Community of Austin and Atheist Republic and American Atheist that are literally just as indoctrinated as any theist I've ever seen. I don't notice any difference between them. They argue the same way. They have the same fallacies. They don't want to talk about the complexities of the topics. They don't want to get into the actual issues. And the problem with that is that it's one thing to not want to dive into a specific topic. I get that. And there's a thing to be said that not everybody is going to understand certain types of things. People are not going to understand my paper, for example, on this particular topic. I get that. But when somebody says you're wrong, and then they don't even read the paper or they don't understand the material, then it gets to be a little bit of more questionable. And so there are a lot of people that want to have the higher engagement, but unfortunately, they're just being pushed down by the people that just says, well, Matt Dillahunty says. That's not an argument. And so they default on what they think they've learned. But when you actually say, well, but what you've learned is incorrect, let me show you why. Most of them just give, again, the same what's called entrenchment effect you'll see in a young Earth creationist, for example, when they're shown evidence that the Earth is not young. They have the backfire effect, right? They double down. It to them, just you arguing against them is reinforcement of their belief. Right. And so you'll see this often, and you see the same thing with atheists. When I show them logic, actual logic, and they just say, well, that's wrong. You're like, okay, but can you explain why the logic is wrong? And they were like, oh, I don't know anything about logic. There you're arguing just like a creationist would.
I see your point. But before I delve into it, I want to try to give James Apperson a chance to talk as well, just because I think he might have something to state based on what you've been stating so far. So James, please go ahead.
Appreciate that. So I appreciate everything Steve had to say just now. I was speaking on this very same topic earlier this evening with Neil from Gnostic Informant about the purposes of debate that are available to us. And I think that the way we go into a debate, the reason we go into a debate can really shape the outcome of it and shape the whole flow of it. And we were talking about initially trying to change minds and whether or not that should even be a goal. And the way I explained it was, it's not just people on the other side of the fence, religious people, religious fundamentalists, that we're trying to help grow in the way that they process issues. It's also people on our side of the fence, non-believers, skeptical, attempting to be rational skeptics. And so if we can really make our case and lay it out step by step, not just here's what we think, but here's why we think it. Here's where we got the things that we regard as facts. Here's why we regard those as facts. Here's how we've worked through the process mentally step by step. Here's where our logic is at, right? If we can do that with our interlocutor, we're not just offering an opportunity for somebody to examine their own thought processes. We're offering the entire community of atheists, or if you want to call it that, an opportunity to examine their own, not just the religious people. And so, because there are a lot of people who identify as atheists who I would not regard as the irrational skeptic. There's a lot of virtue signaling
Without
going on,
question. Without
right?
question.
But they want to be,
Mhm.
right? So I can take a moment if I want it to be, to kind of be a little bit critical of that and a little bit like, dismayed about it. But I can also look at it as an opportunity to say, okay, no matter how sure they are that they've already made it to some like higher form of reasoning, even if they haven't, let's capitalize on the fact that they value it, right? And that they identify with that idea. And because if they just see an atheist on the screen or a rational skeptic on the screen or however they want to categorize that, debating with the religious fundamentalist, no matter what the rational skeptical atheist says on the screen, the non-religious people in the audience, they don't feel threatened by it, because their mindset is that's one of our guys, right? And so because they're not feeling threatened by that, because they're identifying with it, they're really, really receptive, not just to the ideas being presented, but the way that we've worked through the ideas. And this is an opportunity for teaching. And I think that's more important than trying to convince religious people to stop being religious, because that doesn't work in the course of a debate anyways, to be able to kind of lead by example and so the people in the audience that are on our side of the so-called fence, they don't even realize, or maybe some of them do, but I think some of them don't, that we're trying to reach them as much as we're trying to reach anybody else, with trying to get them kind of caught up to speed, right? So I am often frustrated with people on our, on our side, so to speak, and I hate to even use that terminology. That whole us versus them thing, I think, is a problem in our community, and it's really hard to get past that. But there are people that's their narrative, right? It's them versus us. Now, I happen to think that the best way to frame those narratives is not believers versus non-believers. It is not atheists versus theists, because on the issues that really matter most, at least to me personally, when I look at the way that it all shapes up, when we're talking about bigotries and how that those are common in certain types of religious people's camps, right? When you look at the whole spectrum of believers, theists in general, and even if the whole spectrum of Christians, there are more people on our side of that fence where they're trying to be accepting and understanding of the LGBT community and not demonizing atheists and things like that, right? And so if we humor the idea that the us and the them is not only a clearly defined line, but that all theists are on the other side of it, then we're working against the unity that we claim to be trying to pursue. And we're alienating people that don't need to be alienated. Now, I don't know how you guys feel about that. I'll let you speak to that in just a moment. But this is one of the reasons why I think that the way that we use language is so very important. So while we're focused on trying to explain our logical processes and how we do our fact checking and things like that, I think it's really important to help the community further progress the way that we use language, so that we can make more careful points and not be misunderstood, and so that we can encourage more careful thinking. So I do share the frustrations that Steve has about people that identify as atheists. Not all of them, but in general, there is a lot of people that have a lot of catching up to do. Now, I see myself as sort of in the middle of that. That when I hear some people talking like Bree of the Hive, right, or Leo, and other people that are prominent in our community, when I hear them talking, I'm like, these people are so far ahead of me. Their ability to reason on issues and deep dive into the intricacies of issues. Like, I'm the kid in the back of the class eating paste. I really, really am compared to them. But I'm okay with that, right? Because I never want to be, mentally speaking, I never want to be the tallest person in the room. Because if I am, then I have no opportunity to learn from somebody that's further ahead than I am. And so I really appreciate that we've got so many brilliant minds in our community. And at the same time, there's a lot of people that are struggling to play catch up. And part of the reason is because they're newly deconverted, or they haven't quite reached that point yet, or they have, but they're still in their angry atheist phase, where they're overly militant and divisive in the way they use language and the way they frame the narratives, and the reason that they dive into these debates in these discussions. And so I'm patient with all of it, because I recognize we're all in a different part of our journey. And as long as we're valuing the same goals, we all value things like being rational and being ethical and being pro-social, I see that always as an opportunity to help each other further progress. And as long as that's the case, I don't take it personal that some people aren't maybe as rational or skeptical or as informed as they think they might be.
I definitely agree with everything you said. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Please go ahead.
I definitely agree with everything you said. One of the reasons you don't actually want to be the best of everything is there's something called tall poppy syndrome, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that people will go after you if you tend to stick your neck out, so to speak, right? So I definitely understand that, and I agree with you as well. I never want to be the person in the room that knows the most, because again, you're not going to learn anything unless you're actually doing something just like a seminar. Like I've done seminars for atheists and theists where, on this particular topic, it's something that I happen to knew a little bit about, and so you're educating. But at the same token, if I go somewhere else, I would have learned, right? But I think the what you had talked about, there's something called a cooperation principle, that when you go into a dialectic and you have an interlocutor, you're assuming that person is a rational agent. You're assuming that they want to have a dialectic and some kind of synthesis of ideas, that they're going to listen to you and you're going to listen to them. You're going to have a back and forth. This is not always the case. As a matter of fact, in the atheist communities, that is antithetical to what they actually do if you actually look at their practice, because I am in so many atheist Facebook groups where they do the exact same thing you would see a creationist do against objective reality, objective facts. And so I have like a litmus test, James. I do believe in objective morality, but that's something that still somebody doesn't have to accept, right? So you can't even argue that as objective things. But there are certain things I do find to be objective facts. X equals X, the law of identity. For all of X equals X is an objectively logical fact that's a priori knowledge. And yet I still have an atheist who says that's wrong ontologically. Nobody understands why he thinks this way. His argumentation is absurd, to say the least. And he was the head of an atheist organization. I also have things like when people tell me, like atheists love to say, look, give me enough evidence, I'll change my mind, right? I'm a evidentialist, at least a weak form of evidentialist. I particularly am. And they'll say, give enough evidence, I'll change my mind. And you say, okay, let me give you an objective fact. I happen to like a little bit of mathematics, nothing complicated, but I will give them, 0.99 repeating equals 1. That is an objectively equal value in mathematics. They are the exact same number, different way of expressing it. One is an infinite decimal expansion, the other is a terminating decimal, but they are the same number. 1/2, 0.5, same number. One's fractional, one's decimal, but they are the same exact value. And I'll show them mathematically that is correct. And I'll still have atheists go, no, you're wrong on that. I'm like, but I'm giving you if you won't accept objective facts with evidence and logic and mathematics, how the hell are you going to go to a theist and say you have an open mind that you'll change your position on God?
Yeah,
it's very dishonest.
I definitely see your position. I think that there are, and definitely when you're talking about individuals, not to say anything about individuals on Facebook or anything like that, because don't get me wrong, or Twitter, for instance, because there's a lot of individuals that are out there that are trying their best to understand logic towards the best of their capabilities. But at the same time, there are individuals that have a feeling that, well, since now I have become an atheist, now I know a plethora of things more than you or anybody else.
Right.
And I think that's where we run into the problem, because it's kind of like, look, yes, you've now become an atheist, but the thing is that let's be humbled by that surrounding and understand that we're unable to know everything. And henceforth, there's no need to argue, just like how you said, logically, that X equals X and stuff like that. And yes, I know we can jump into fuzzy logic and everything like that, where the lines start to
even in fuzzy logic, you got to have identity.
It's true.
Right.
But still, in the end, it's kind of like we need to really delve into understanding that when we're trying to have conversations with theists or try to have conversations within our own groups, we got to understand that we should only go as far as our I don't want to say as far as our education could go, but as far as we know, in a sense. And then from that point, we need to be humble and say, I don't know.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Else.
Yeah, look, a lot of people don't want to say that they are just not familiar with the topic. Their egos won't allow them to do it. There are certain topics I won't touch that I know nothing about. Absolutely. Look, if you want to talk about neurosurgery, whatever, I don't know a damn thing about neurosurgery. And so it's kind of funny because most people in our communities, they're rather lay when it comes to these certain topics. And so maybe it has some form of education. I had 4 years of college, but I didn't finish my degree, but I certainly had a significant amount of credits. I mean, I did train people to operate nuclear power plants, so I know a little bit about reactors. But the thing is that any lay person can go read and learn and things of that nature. But when you're going against an expert, you got to be real careful. I have experts on my shows all the time. I mean, most of my guests are PhDs. I'm not going to sit there, hey, oh, you're an idiot. You don't know anything about biology. You just, got a PhD in evolutionary biology. No, but I may question them because I'll be like, okay, well, this is how I learned it. Can you maybe explain why things have changed or what's incorrect on it? But the problem is when you have a lot of people on these like panels and they're all giving their views and stuff like that. Again, it goes back to the whole indoctrination of new atheism TM, is that they're not willing to change their mind. They're just simply not willing to. And I see it so frequently. And yet, you talk about, that people becoming atheist and then they say, well, what is there to know about atheism? I'm like, oh my God, there's so much to learn about atheism. There's a whole study called atheology. It is a vast and rich subject. Go read Miracle Theism by Mackey. It is a complicated book, but it gets a lot of arguments out there. It's a great book. It's probably the holy Bible of atheism. It should be. It's called the Miracle Theism by Mackey. Yeah, Mackey.
I completely agree.
I have never read it straight through, all through, but I mean, I've read a pretty good chunk of it. But it's my go-to book when I have, something I want to go check out. Oppie, go read, Graham Oppie, one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Brilliant philosopher. And so people that say, oh, atheism is just like a lack of belief. I'm like, then what are these people writing about? Why are people, even in the secular side, even like the non-philosophical atheists, like, Richard Dawkins or something like that. What are they writing about then? Now, there's some things I agree with them, some things I don't, but they're writing about atheism. There's still a subject to be had there. And I don't understand how anybody can say, well, what do you mean? Go read a paper on atheism. Yeah, there's a lot of them. Go check them out. Trust me. It blows my mind. And then they think that they're going to argue against me that I'm wrong when I'm telling them about philosophical atheism. And I'm like, but you've never even read a paper on this. I'm not claiming expertise, but my God, at least I've read something.
Sure.
Right. Sorry, James, you were about to talk, so please go ahead.
No, sorry, Josh. So I had a discussion with somebody about this very same thing again earlier tonight. And again yesterday with Mark Reed, because we were talking about what it means to be an atheist. And of course, there's the two primary definitions that people talk about. There's the lack-theist idea of atheist, and then there's the anti-theist idea of atheist, where you're taking a definitive stand there are no gods. And that sounds simple enough until you start asking yourself, well, what is this God thing that you either don't have a belief in or are standing against? Because then we have to define that.
Well, let's dive into that real quick. Because the term anti-theist has a well-established use. The term anti-theist is antithetical to protheism. Protheism is the approach that there's axiological value in religion and the belief in God. Anti-theism is the opposite of that. They hold that religion is dangerous to society, or at least devalues society and lowers the axiological value of society, or at least the belief in God does. It could be one or the other. It doesn't really make a difference. So that has a established usage in academic literature. So when you say the belief that God doesn't exist, that has nothing to do with anti-theism, because that's
all right.
Axiological.
So what word would you use
atheism.
For someone that? Okay. So atheism covers everybody who simply lacks a belief and everybody that...
I mean, generally speaking, that's how people, in the atheist communities use it. I don't use it that way. The literature doesn't use it that way. It talks about it, but then it argues why that usage is poor. Dr. Draper in Stanford Encyclopedia gives 3 solid reasons why people should not use it in philosophy that way. He has outright said in philosophy, this should not be the case. Don't use it as a lack of belief. And there's very, very good reasons for that. I wrote my paper on why we shouldn't and why should we reject Flu's paper, because Anthony Flew wrote a paper in 1971 called The Presumption of Atheism. And it never got much traction because it has a lot of issues with it. But the new atheist movement jumped on that. Silverman jumped on that when he wrote Fighting God, right? And I haven't get along with David. We actually get along. I don't agree with him on anything, hardly, except for some of it, maybe some of the social stuff. But I mean, as far as like atheism, I don't really much agree with him. But he jumped on that. A guy named George Smith, he jumped on it when he wrote a book called A Case Against God in 1974, I think it was. And so this new atheist movement is just an extension of that, because they wanted to jump on the idea that if you don't believe in God, you're an atheist, to get people in for demographics, to get people in for voting power. That's all it was. At least some of them were actually forthright to admit that. But some of them who didn't, they seem to be a little disingenuous, because you got people out there going, "Oh, that's not the reason why they adopted it." Yeah, it actually is. It's literally in their books. They've actually they're quite outspoken about that's the reason they did it.
Sure, but what you're saying right now, it speaks to the fact that language is a barrier for a lot of people that are in different places in their way of thinking. And so one person can use words a certain way, and that has no resonance or relevance or applicability in somebody else's paradigm. Because if you're looking at this from an experienced, knowledgeable philosopher, you hear a certain word like atheist, it means something different to you than it means to somebody who's just casually deconverted, and they found a whole bunch of other people that are like railing against religion, and then they're like, well, if you don't believe in a God, you're not a theist, therefore you're an atheist. And they go, oh, okay, and it sounds reasonable. And in a casual way,
But
well,
is it though? I see. I you answered before. You said something that I really liked. You said it shouldn't be theist against atheist. I agree with that. It should be rational against irrational or non-rational. And the problem you're running into is when atheists start adopting things like that, they start using the same irrational approaches creationists and other people use, because they don't even really know what they're arguing at that point. They're just parroting what they think they've heard, rather than actually thinking about it and going, this actually makes sense to do this. And when they look at the philosophy behind it and the arguments against it and the logic, they go, some of them actually go, yeah, this is silly. Why would I do this? And so just because somebody will interpret something some way doesn't mean it's by some necessity that's a rational way to approach it. It's not. I think atheism is completely non-rational. If somebody looks into it that has an open mind, they'll go, yeah, why would I want to do this? Because the biggest thing is it actually subsumes the agnostic position. It literally subsumes it. And so when you have people coming out of theism who don't want to become the atheist, take on the atheist label, or for whatever reason, they're like, yeah, if I told my family I was atheist, they would, but they go, look, I don't even have the belief that there isn't a God. I just questioning. I'm no longer a believer. I don't believe in God. There's a middle ground to be had there that they can transfer through called agnosticism, and new atheism, it takes that away from them. And I think that hobbles them. I think it takes away the ability for people leaving religion to not. A lot of them don't want to jump right into atheism and go, there is no God, and we'll go even further. God sucks, or something like that. Agnosticism gives them a way to say, look, I no longer believe. I'm still questioning. I don't have a position either way. I'm a fence sitter. And by the way, James, this is something that I get so much pushback for, but when they look at the logic, this is how it is. People that identify as atheists that are literally just weak, what would be typically referred to as weak atheism, are logically agnostic. They are fence sitters. I have proven this with logic. I mean, there's no escaping that. And so they're also weak theist. I have proven that with logic, if you want to use the semantic content. But yeah, it's so when you tell an atheist, well, okay, you don't believe in God, but you don't believe there isn't a God, that's known as agnosticism or agnostic in the literature. And also, if you're going to use weak atheists to represent the lack of belief God exists, then that by the same rationale implies weak theism, which is the position that you don't believe there isn't a God. And so anybody who's just sitting on the fence, like, I'm agnostic, I sit on the fence, I'm a weak atheist and weak theist by the same token, but at least you have differentiation in terms. But all of a sudden, if I normalize weak atheism to just be a simpliciter of atheism, and weak theism to be a simpliciter of theism, I'm now agnostic, theist, and atheist. It loses all meaning. And that's my semantic collapse argument that I wrote my paper on. That is still, this day, hasn't been assailed. So you're talking about language. You're talking about the utility of language. By adopting these imprecise terms or less valuable terms, you're literally making language meaningless in that way, because you're just saying, oh, well, I'm just going to identify as I want, philosophically speaking. And I just don't think that's productive.
Yeah, I would actually, because I do find that when we do look at the terminology, and definitely the terminology of strong atheist, weak atheist, strong theist, weak theist.
Mhm.
I have a feeling that there's a sense of nuance when we really look at these terminologies in and of themselves. There seems to be more steps or more processes to them in a sense.
Yeah,
And
but 40 years ago, you didn't need that.
oh, you're absolutely right. But
You said atheists, people knew what you're talking about. You didn't believe that. I mean, you believe there's no God. That's what atheist was.
right.
Yeah.
But the thing is that because people want to go towards the side of being more, how could I, not critical. There's a particular word that I'm not thinking of right now. But they want to be more reputable. That's the thing. So instead, they don't want to take a hard position on one side or a hard position on the other side. So henceforth, they want to try to be a little more kind of like, I'm not sure, but
that's the agnostic
I
position.
more.
That literally means like agnostic on P means agnostic on the proposition, that you don't take a position either way. Yeah.
Right. I would actually agree with those distinctions. I'm somebody who looks at those distinctions as just being theist, agnostic, and atheist. I don't necessarily break it down within the weak and the strong and all the rest.
Yeah, I don't either. I do it for conversational purposes,
Right.
but I don't adopt that paradigm at all. I think that paradigm is a poor way to approach it, because again, you're now saying you're now trying to define something in the negative, right? And again, I wrote a draft. It's not a full paper, but I wrote a draft called By Definition that explains that words by usage have meaning, but these words you find in like dictionaries do not prescribe language. English is not a prescribed language. They describe usages. And so anybody goes to a dictionary and says, oh, look, this dictionary says, atheism is the belief that God doesn't exist, or a lack of belief. That's just describing somebody. That's all. That's just saying that this is how the word is being used, and it's describing what an atheist is. But I think what atheists make the mistake is that when they say, oh, this is the description, if you fit that description, you're the label. That's not how English works. That's prescriptivism. And they don't understand the difference between prescriptivism and descriptivism. And then they project it onto me and say, I'm being prescriptivist. I'm like, no, I've been arguing against prescriptivism for like a decade now.
Right. So in a sense, the terminology agnostic atheist, what do you think of the, do you think this is the same as I think as weak atheist and strong atheist type of terminologies? Or is this more or less kind of sitting on the fence, but at the same time taking another step forward?
I don't know what it means. I've written 6 blog articles probably on agnostic atheists, and I will give myself credit for this. I won't be able to prove this, believe it or don't. I don't care. But I pretty well know that Matt Dillahunty, I know Matt Dillahunty has changed his position on this. He no longer accepts agnostic atheism as being something that makes sense. He calls it nonsensical. In the weak case, it is, and I've argued that. And he'll say, oh, the agnostics get it right. He's referring to me. I know he is. He's mentioned anytime this topic comes up, he'll mention my name. And I know it's my arguments that convinced him through other people. Other people have said, knowledge is a subset of belief. You shouldn't have a multi-axis approach. These are some problems with it, with categories and set theory. He's been exposed to all this stuff. All that came from my writings. I don't know anybody that argued against agnostic atheism before I came along to the degree I have. So I will take credit for that. Sorry. But when somebody says agnostic atheist, I always ask them the same question. Can you put that into logical notation for me? And I'm not playing a gotcha game. I'm not trying to play any kind of game with them. I have written articles on why logically it doesn't make sense, because there's no coherent, consistent logical schema that I can come up with to where that phraseology, where you juxtapose 2 words like that, where it makes sense on a multi-actual Cartesian type diagram system. I cannot do it. Doesn't mean it's not possible. So I'm not claiming it's not possible, but I have not been able to do it, and nobody else has either. Right. And so I say, well, what does that mean in logic? Just show me. And then some people have been able to do that. I'm like, okay, but when you do that, it reduces to this. I'm like, oh crap, I never thought about that. Or that's ambiguous. And you're like, oh yeah, that's right. There you go. So it's either nonsensical, superfluous, or ambiguous. And so I don't know what they mean by agnostic atheist. And just telling what it means is not going to convey anything to me, because I'm like, but now you have all these different people saying this is what it means to me. It becomes so stipulative, it loses all ability to have any conveyance of actual meaning. Because you ask, and I've done this, you ask 5 different atheists, 6 different atheists what they mean by agnostic atheist, you get 5 or 6 very different versions of what they think it means. So I'm like, well, just put it in logical notation, so it loses the ambiguity.
Right. So I don't wear that label. In fact, I try to avoid wearing labels. I always feel like if somebody's going to ask me that question, I want to have a deeper, more nuanced discussion where I can explain what I really think and why I think it. Is Wes still back there? If he is, go ahead and share that diagram that I.
Oh, by the way,
shared.
I'm not appealing to Matt Dillahunty. I'm just stating something that was the case, right? That Matt Dillahunty changed his position after people told him, yeah, this is logically stupid to have agnostic atheist.
Sure. So here's the attempt that I've seen to lay out in a diagram form a way to give these ideas a linguistically consistent meaning, even if they're not accepted in schools of philosophy. So could you look at this and tell me where you think they go wrong?
Yeah, there's a couple problems with it. One, okay, you notice at the very top, it introduces a new parameter called certainty. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Knowledge is a subset of belief. Certainty is a subset of knowledge. Okay, so if you look at there's two main forms of knowledge that are generally out there. There's more than that, but there's two primary ones called the weak acceptance case and the strong acceptance case. The strong acceptance case is that knowledge requires certainty. Some philosophers do adhere to that. There are not many. I if you look at the academic literature, almost it's pretty insignificant, but it does exist. The weak acceptance case is that knowledge doesn't require certainty, but knowledge is still a subset of belief. And the reason for that is that if you look at the most common theories of knowledge called justified true belief, there's three conditions. It's a tripartite condition system. One, the belief has to be true. The proposition has to be true. Okay. Somebody has to believe it, and you have to be justified to believe it. And again, there's issues with JTB with Gettier, and I understand all that. But primarily JTB or JTB plus is commonly used for knowledge. If you start getting into semantic and pragmatic theories, then you get a little more flexibility. But here they introduce certainty. Well, one of them I'm not certain. I say I know God exists, but I'm not certain of it. What am I then? Am I agnostic theist? Even though they just believe? What happened to the person who says, "Oh yeah, I know there's a God, but I'm not certain"? Where are they on this chart?
So somebody who says, I know there's a God, but I'm not certain. To me, that's a contradiction of expressions. I think that's why they're not represented in the chart.
Well, no, because in the weak acceptance case, knowledge doesn't require certainty. There's no condition for certainty in knowledge.
In common language, if you claim to know something, you're claiming that you accept it as a fact.
But that's not certainty.
No, it's not certainty. Certainty is a feeling, as far as I'm concerned.
No. Certainty is a propositional epistemic disposition.
Sure, based on a feeling.
No. I don't think anything.
In common language, it is.
Well, I mean, look, I'm certain X equals X. That's not a feeling. That's an established fact because it's a priori knowledge, right? I mean, I'm certain X. And look, I could be wrong about the claim, but I'm not. I mean, it's indubitable to me. I can't doubt X equals X, right? I mean, just to me, it's indubitable. But I'm also claiming certainty on it. Am I wrong to claim certainty on that?
No, I don't think you're wrong to claim certainty on it, but I think certainty is an expression of feeling that you can justify. So, but I don't want to get deep into semantics right now. We're just wanting to. I'll go ahead and remove that. Well, put it back on for a second because that's not the only issue.
Okay, so if you look at the logic, when you look at these types of diagrams, they have to be consistent. Okay. Let's do an internal critique, right? Because they're taking the Gnostic and they're using it as an adjective, correct? To modify for certainty, not for even knowledge, but for certainty. But if you look at the agnostic theist, it says believes in a God or gods, correct? That is the object being modified by the epistemic modifier Gnostic. Believes in a God. Okay. Now, if you look at agnostic atheist, they change the object of being modified. Now it says lacks a belief in God. That's not the same object. You have to have consistency if you have this kind of diagram. It should be agnostic atheist believes God does not exist. It's the negation of the proposition. They completely change the negator to the scope on the proposition, and they move it to the predication. And that is fallacious. It's a little subtle move that a lot of people don't catch. But if you want to be consistent in these types of diagrams, if you have an object and you want to modify it with Gnostic or agnostic, the object must remain the same. And it doesn't here. It changes from beliefs in God to lack of belief in God. And that's not. It needs to be the negation. It needs to be the same thing modified. Believes in a God on one side, believes God does not exist on the other. And that's a lot more less ambiguous. That actually a lot more coherent.
So here's the problem that I have with the
And
whole
knowledge
thing.
is a subset of belief. If you just lack a belief, that doesn't mean anything. How do you modify that if you just lack a belief? It doesn't tell you if you believe or claiming knowledge. How do you have any kind of epistemic modification with certainty if you don't even have the belief first? You can't.
Sure. That's true. So the problem that I have with all of them is that it doesn't define God. It doesn't define, and I would like to hear you define it.
All right. Well, yeah, somebody had pointed out, by the way, they butcher what Gnostic means too. Gnostic, before I answer your question, let me get this out there so people can go read about this. Gnostic does not mean knowledge. I don't care what anybody is telling you. Gnostic does not mean knowledge. It is used in Greek for gnosis, which represents a very specific type of knowledge, not epistemic knowledge. This is something where you look at the etymology of the word and you go, oh, look, it says knowledge, but you don't understand the nuance of the word. Gnostic referred to Gnosticism, an adherent to somebody in the 1st to 4th century that believed a very specific belief system, or at least one of 4 types were the main ones. But they believed that the heavens were created by this being called Yaldabaoth, and this person named Sophia, which was a lesser aeon or sister of Jesus, fell from Plamora, fell from the heavens, and on her way down, she instilled in all mankind what's called divine knowledge or esoteric knowledge of the fact that Yaldabaoth was a trickster god that created the earth but didn't create the heavens. That was the unknown God. You'll see people talk about the unknown God in literature. That's what they're referring to in the Gnosticism. That knowledge that was instilled on us, that divine spark of knowledge, similar to what Christians would have, right? What Plantinga would argue. It's the knowledge of the hidden God. That was gnosis. And by figuring out that knowledge, by gaining that esoteric knowledge, you could become more one with the gods and come back. That's what Gnosticism was about. So Gnostic, being used to just knowledge makes no sense. But to answer your question, I have a stipulative definition that I use for my writings for God. If you want me to pull it up here.
Sure.
I can read it verbatim.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. And I know he's got that other graphic to show too, the one I gave him. So I use this. God, a necessary being or agent with intentionality that all contingents are dependent upon and or can prescriptively change or suspend natural law by having complete dominion over an aspect of nature. That works for anything that I particularly do. People don't have to, use it. You can define things the way you want. Again, it's just description. But I think if you believe there's a being that is a necessary being, which doesn't have to be God, but a necessary being that all contingent things come from, and that being has intentionality and the ability to prescriptively change the laws of the universe, I personally going to call that God. You don't have to. I think it works. I think it makes sense. I mean, else, what are we talking about, right? What are we talking when we say, do you believe in God? Almost everybody out there is going to go, yeah, I have an idea what they mean by that. God created the universe. God created the heavens. They have an idea what people mean by God. People don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to that.
But don't you think that God in and of itself needs to have some sort of descriptor in a sense?
That is a descriptor. From which all things contingent must flow from. A necessary being from which all contingency comes from. That created the universe. That's about as fundamental as you get, right?
Where you're coming from. I see where you're coming from. But it's just that there seems to be, how could I say it? The descriptor is something that seems to be transcendent from the knowledge that we have. So in a sense, what it is kind of like an ambiguous statement that is being made.
Well, I don't think ambiguous. I think that's precise. That is very precise. A necessary being with intentionality, that's pretty precise. But again, 13 billion people believe in some type of God. They have a concept about that. It's not that they believe some kind of nebulous thing. If I said to you right now, hey, do you believe in Superman? What comes to your mind? Christopher Reed or something, you have an image of what Superman looks like. If I say, what's a property of Superman? Oh, he can fly. You have an idea of what some of the, he's super strong. Does that mean you believe he exists? No, it means that you understand the concept of what Superman is, right? And so when we talk about God, I don't know why people have to muddy the water by going, what do you mean by God? We've had thousands of years of discourse on it. The people
we have.
The atheist who says that God talk is meaningless, they're actually saying to themselves, this word holds no semantic context to me. It is like saying blah, 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 blah. It doesn't have any meaning to them. And I find that to be a little disingenuous because, when people say, again, do you believe in Superman? People know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's true. I see exactly what you mean, but I think James wants to add something in there. So James, please go ahead.
I mean, I guess I'm just going to get really bold here and say I don't agree with any of that. So here's the thing.
What do you mean by God?
And that's exactly my point that I'm leading to. It's I sat in a panel with some friends the other night. We weren't on the spot. There's nobody trying to pressure us or doing a gotcha. We were just talking. And we're like, well, how would we define a God in such a way where it can account for the way everybody uses it? And the way you're using it right now certainly wouldn't work for that.
Well,
And
what God would not fit into that? And there might be outliers. but
so like,
I think that's the
so
vast majority. All Christian
the
gods, the monotheistic God fit into that.
sure, it's that's fine. I mean, monotheism is a fairly late invention in religious history, and we need to
Yeah.
think of the larger span of religious ideas. But sure, it's typical of monotheism. But then you have polytheism, right? That they wouldn't hold to that idea. The Greeks,
no,
for example,
it would has complete dominion over an aspect of nature, or could suspend or manipulate natural law. Thor can, send
sure,
lightning bolts. That's manipulation of natural law.
sure, but nobody thinks that all the gods were necessary beings, nor that they all created the universe.
They didn't have to be, right?
Right,
I said or.
so
It's a disjunction, right? It's not a conjunction that I put in my. Again, these are descriptors. These are not prescriptive, but it's a disjunction that I put in there. So if you can have a necessary being from which all things contingently come from, or some being that can control aspects of nature. Look, if you can change the laws of science and physics and suspend nature, I'm okay with calling that a god. You don't have to. Nobody else does. But that to me is godlike power.
Okay, well, if you're impressed with it, I can appreciate that. If I saw it happen, I think.
Would you not?
Well, I wouldn't know that. Well, I wouldn't know that that's what I was seeing, even if I saw it, because if I see anything happen in our physical world, I'm going to expect that if it happens outside the confines of the parameters of what I think is physically possible, that's just going to make me think, oh, more things are physically possible than I thought. It's not going to make me think, oh, well, there's been a suspension or violation of the physical laws.
It depends on the violation of physical law. I mean, there's a certain things that I think that we categorize as what's called supernatural, right? There's a natural set, and then the non-natural set, and in this particular case, it's synonymous with supernatural, right? So there are elements in naturalism. You and I are natural elements. We exist in the set of natural. Then the theist is arguing there's sets in the supernatural set, one of which is going to call it a god. The naturalist is going to say it's an empty set, right? They're going to say the set of supernatural, it has no elements in it.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't put it that way, but I think maybe
this is how I'm looking at. I look at it. I
sure.
mean, a naturalist. If you ask a naturalist how many elements are there in a supernatural set, they're committed to say zero, are they not?
I'm not. I would say that supernatural is not a rational proposition. It's a
not
nothing
natural.
burger.
Well, you're arguing that everything is natural, right?
Everything is natural.
So if God exists, if there's a God, the Christian God, you're going to put that under naturalism.
If a super being, a super-powered, autonomously self-aware being that decided one day or one non-day, because he hadn't created time yet, that he was going to go ahead and create, which again is a chronological expression, and can't do that either, but you can't make a new decision if there's no chronology because he hadn't invented time yet. So there he is sitting around since not ever and decides or non-decides one non-day that he's going to go ahead and make the universe. So then he makes the universe. Somebody can call that a god if they want to. I just call it somebody with way too much non-time on their hands.
Okay, well,
so
I mean, but again, but you see the things. We're having discussions with theists, and theists, like I said, 3 billion or 2 billion, whatever it is, theists. There's a lot of them. We have to discuss it as the topic as understood, right? I mean, anybody can start getting into the weeds. I see no point of that. You're not going to change the mind of anybody by getting into the weeds. To me, if there's a creator being, let's say there's a being that created the universe and sustains it, like what's called theistic personalism. Some theistic personalized God where it's a great demerge. He exists. He sustains the universe. Without him, the universe can't exist. Okay. I don't know what else more godlike would it be. So when people are talking about God, that's what something like that would be what they're talking about. And if not, what's the whole point of the discussion? Because they're arguing, something created us, and by which the Christians believe that because of that being, you can go back to him. You can have salvation. You can live everlasting life and all this. If you're not talking about those particular concepts, then you're not engaging on the dialogue at that point. You're
Depends on who you're
recusing
talking
yourself.
with. Depends on who you're talking with. Because if you're talking to
sure.
a pantheist, they don't mean it that way.
Well,
If
sure,
you're
but
talking Go
yeah,
on.
I mean, of course, yeah. I mean, obviously,
A pandeist doesn't mean it that way either, but they
Correct.
believe in a very literal entity that is the universe.
Yeah.
So,
or that died and created the universe. Some pandeists will actually say that God existed. He ceased to be, and we're living in his corpse, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I do. Of all the different theories that somebody might call a God theory, one of the pandeism theories is my favorite, where that this God created emanations of himself, like finite echoes of himself. So,
Gnosticism too.
okay.
Because Sophia was an emanation. She wanted her own emanations. That's why she fell from Plamora. She was an aeon, one of the principal beings. There was 6 or 7, I believe, in the heavens. It changes from scripture to scripture. You can read 6, 7, 9 of the holy, spheres of influence and the principalities. But she was one of them, and she wanted her own emanations, and I guess they kicked her out for that. And so you see these things in all kinds of different literature. But at least what you just said, this God created everything, you still have a concept of what you're talking about. That's why I think atheism is just so, it doesn't get you anywhere. It's basically just taking you out of the conversation. Because if somebody says, I'm an atheist, and they start talking about atheism and theism, that's a contradiction. To me, and I don't want to do this no truth atheist thing, but to me, an atheist would say, I don't even know what the hell you're talking about. It'd be like listening to physicists use words like, Josh, have you ever see that video where they do a funny thing where they just throw out all these complicated words?
Big time.
Yeah,
and you're just sitting there and you're wondering to yourself, "What?
Right? Am I an idiot, or does this make sense?" The confabulation of the second reduction of the third tribulation. It's just like. But that's what it would be to an atheist. They would have no idea what they couldn't even begin to have a conversation. They would be like, you know what? I'm going to go play football instead. I'm going to watch TV. Right? That's what an atheist would be. But before I forget, because James, you had asked before we went on the difference between atheism and theological and cognitivist, right? So let me touch on that real quick. The way I look at it is the atheist holds that God talk is meaningless. There's no cognitive value to be had when you start talking about God. These words have no meaning to them. Again, words have meanings through usage, right? There's no internal meaning to words. And so the theological and cognitivist takes that, but makes it one step further. They say, because words have God talk has no meaning, you cannot have a proposition with them in it. So if I say God exists, that is non-propositional to them. That has no truth value to it, because a proposition by the principle of bivalence, either true or false, law excluded middle. Either it's going to be true or false. It can't be something else. And so to the theological and non-cognitivists, they say the proposition God exists is incoherent. It is meaningless. It has nothing that can assign a truth value to it. It's not truth app, they would call it. And so to them, you actually couldn't even say whether they're the theist or not a theist. You couldn't even, to them, those categories don't even exist, right? They'll say, believe in God, and be like, what's that? And you're like, okay, well, you don't believe in God. Okay, but I don't even know what I don't believe in. Oh, you're a non-theist. I don't even know what the hell that category is. You have to take what's called a higher epistemic vantage point to look at it and go, oh, yeah, they're non-theist to me because they don't believe in God. But to them, they don't know what these categories even mean. You see? So the theological cognitivist holds that God talk is so meaningless that you can't even ask the question or the proposition, does God exist, because it's no truth value can be assigned to it. It's
well,
just,
there's no,
the color 2 is purple,
Yeah. I mean, I would grant them enough to say that it's not a fully formed question until somebody tells you how they are defining God. Until then, there's not enough of a question there to answer.
Okay, but theists, come on, theists write all kinds of books on God. We know what they mean by it. Yeah.
But
I mean,
I think, because I kind of see where James is coming from, those, because, and as you stated also with the way that you stated how God is described, or a descriptor of God that you came with, Steve, that does actually give that said descriptor. But at the same time, I think that it matters on what properties we speak of, because if we speak of something that is of the omnis, for instance, so when we look at God and they say, well, we see something of the triomni deity, for instance, now we start to run into complications because we really don't know how to think of what that actually means.
Well, there's some logical problems there.
Wait, pardon?
There's some logical problems with the omnis. Obviously,
Yes.
I think they're inconsistent with each other in some degrees, because to me, you can't have an all-powerful, all benevolent, all just being and be merciful. Those are antithetical to each other.
Exactly. I would completely agree with that. So I think what we end up needing to do is lowering the criteria of what God is, in a sense, in order for it to have some sort of relevancy within the realms that we're trying to define it in.
Yeah.
Right. So the way that you explained it is actually a pretty good descriptor of something that has a lot of power, but it's not an omni being, but it still has a lot of power.
And by the way, somebody actually points out that Oppie argues differently on this, believe it or not. And I love Oppie. I think he's one of the greatest philosophers of modern day. But and I don't know if he really like full throttle argues this, but he makes a point. One of his arguments is that if you are a theological cognitivist or an atheist, it epistemically commits you to atheism. Because it's if something is so incoherent, you're to him, you're committed to believe that it doesn't exist because it's incoherent, right? And so if you ask me what some weird name, as Tillandy would say, if you ask me that is, I'm committed to that doesn't exist until I know what it means, and then once I know what it means, I'm like, oh yeah, I believe in that. Let's say it means like Spanish for rat or something, yeah, I know rats exist, but I don't take that full on approach. To me, even though it's meaningless, I don't think it epistemically commits you to say that doesn't exist. Oppie argues in one case that it does, but Drange actually doesn't hold to that. So he argues theological cognitivists doesn't commit you to that. So I mean, and again, these are not hills to die on. These are just arguments that they'll put out there. I don't think Oppie would say, yes, you are absolutely entailed by this. He just runs an argument that, yeah, maybe you are kind of committed to the belief that God doesn't exist if you're a theological cognitivist. I don't take that approach, but yes, Oppie can compatibilize those. Yes. Somebody had noted that in the live chat.
Nice. James, is there anything that you want to add into this? Because we're coming up on the hour, so I don't, unless Steve, you want to continue.
I'm having fun. I can go for at least another 30 minutes.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Sure.
We can then do that then.
We're not, yeah, we got some other stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
Wait, so yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, James. My apologies.
Go ahead.
Let me go ahead and share this from Carl Sagan and get Steve's thoughts on that. So go ahead and go over
after that. Go back to can we at least show the new atheist enumerations that I had?
Absolutely.
I don't want to get too far in that because I want people to see them and agree or disagree. Yeah, go ahead.
Whenever you're ready there, Wes, I'll go ahead and press play on that, and then we'll get your thoughts on it.
The word God covers an enormous range of different ideas, and you recognize that in the way you phrase the question. Running from an outsized, light-skinned male with a long white beard sitting in a throne in the sky and tallying the fall of every sparrow, for which there is no evidence. To my mind, if anybody has some, I sure would like to see it. To the kind of God that Einstein or Spinoza talked about, which is very close to the sum total of the laws of the universe. Now, it'd be crazy to deny that there are laws in the universe. And if that's what you want to call God, then of course God exists. And there are all sorts of other nuances. There is, for example, the deist God that many of the founding fathers of this country believed in, although it is a secret whose name may not be spoken in some circles, a roi fainéant, a do-nothing king, the God who creates the universe and then retires, and to whom praying to is sort of pointless. He's not here. He went somewhere else. He had other things to do. Now, that's also a God. So when you say, do you believe in God? If I say yes or if I say no, you have learned absolutely nothing.
I guess I'm asking you to define yours if you have one.
But why would we use a word so ambiguous that means so many different things?
Gives you freedom to define it.
It gives you freedom to seem to agree with someone else with whom you do not agree. It covers over differences. It makes for social lubrication, but it is not an aid to truth, in my view.
Yeah. So I mean, Sagan makes
Sharper language when we ask these questions. Sorry to take so long in answering.
All right.
Yeah,
So that's about it.
Yeah, he makes very good points, and here's the thing. One of the things he talks about is actually, I would call God in abstentia, which is the absence God, the God of absence. The God of absence. That God in abstentia is that he doesn't care, he doesn't listen, he's not around, he's a absolute entity. He created the universe and walked away, or maybe he created it for aesthetic reasons, right? Maybe he was just a painter and he's like, I love this, and he created the universe for aesthetic reasons. Either way, he's no longer around. But when you ask the question, do you believe in God? People that believe in some kind of God, they're going to say, yes, this is the type of God I believe in, right? They're going to have some concept to them, what they mean by it. And that's all you're doing. You're just opening up that initial line of questioning. Do you believe in God? A person who is committed to ontological naturalism is going to say no, because again, they don't believe in any gods, right? They believe all gods are BS, or all gods are wrong, all gods are false. So you automatically eliminated all of that group. So when you ask the question, which is called the great debate question, it's been the great debate question for centuries. Do you believe in God? Does God exist is the question. Does God exist? A theist is going to say, yeah, and then they're going to tell you what kind of theist they mean. I don't think you have to sit there and really get down to the nitty gritty of what somebody means by God, because they're going to tell you what they mean. They're going to be, yes, I believe in God. This is the God, Vishnu. Oh, okay.
Sure, but the student there that asked him, he asked him what he meant, and he's like, well, what would you define as a god? Like, because he was basically saying there's so many different ideas about what that might mean.
Right, I think he's trying to make a point on that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He said to Carl Sagan, I need you to define what a god is to you, if you have one.
But if you're asking the question,
why would I?
I mean, again, he talked about Spinoza's God, or the God of philosophers, right? And sure, if you want to call that a god, okay, but that's not what 3 billion people, believe in a God. That's just a semantic thing at that point, right? The God of the philosophers, or Spinoza's God, is not a God with intentionality. It's just the elegance and the beauty of science, math, music, everything. And look, and I love that, by the way. A big fan of Spinoza's version of a God, the elegancy of the relationship between the sciences and mathematics and music and light, and just such a correlation between everything that to a theist, they'll argue it must be a God because there's just so much harmony, right? And I don't go that far, obviously, but I do have awe in the spiritual nature of it, the spiritualism, which is not a supernatural thing, but the awe and wonder of the intricacies, of the compatibilism of very different lines of science and things of that nature, which seem to be intrinsically related to each other. I mean, do you think that probably 1,000 years ago they ever would have related music to frequency and wavelength, and then to electromagnetic radiation in Maxwell's equations? And I mean, there's just a beauty of that. And you get into harmonics, and you get into all these different things that go, man, I can apply this to how the universe is set up, all the galaxy distribution, right? There's a fundamental, even in chaos, there's order. Right. With strange attractors. And so I find that to be amazing. If you want to call that a God, okay, but when I'm asking somebody, if they believe in God, yeah, I meaning more of a supernatural context. And again, you can suss that out. And I don't think it's a bad question to ask. I just think that you just need to suss out more sometimes. Sure.
I think the moment we invoke supernatural, we can't do anything with it. That is rational, because supernatural isn't wrong. It's not a concept at all, so it can't be wrong. It's not a rational proposition.
I disagree, because it has to, the concept or the class has to exist by logic. If you have the natural set,
it doesn't.
I'm explaining. If you have a natural set, there has to be a complementary set to that. So in the universe, what's called the universal set, which is a set of all things, you have set A and A prime. One is a complement of the other. So if you're not in set A, by mutually exclusive, jointly exhaustive, you have to be in the set of not A. Okay, so things that are a duck are in the set of duck. If you're not a duck, you're in the complementary set of not duck. The set natural must, by logic, have the set non-natural. I'm just going to semantically call that supernatural. You don't have to. But I think because the way we want to describe these words and have a meaningful conversation, it makes sense to do so. Because if it's not natural, what else do you mean other than supernatural if it's not natural? That set has to exist. But if you don't want to call it supernatural, what does it mean to be non-natural but not supernatural?
I would say
So-
that it's more unknown. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's supernatural or non-natural. It's just something that is unknown.
Okay, but that's an epistemic issue, right?
That is true.
Yeah, but the set still exists. The non-natural set must exist. You could say it's an empty set, but if it's an empty set, what is an empty set of? Just things that we don't know. So non-natural just means things we don't know. See,
I mean, it does sound ambiguous. It does sound very ambiguous when you state that an empty set is something that you just don't know, and then after it moves into the area of the natural afterwards. But I do understand the distinctions that you're trying to bring up.
By the way, Josh, has anybody brought this up before? I'm just wondering, is this new to anybody?
Heard it?
No, definitely not with that specific. Okay. The distinctions in and of themselves, absolutely not.
A lot of people have never been exposed to this type of stuff, especially when they call themselves atheist. And it's just like, I mean, it's, like I said, just because you label yourself an atheist doesn't mean you understand atheism or naturalism or, any of these concepts. And I wish people more would start learning about it, because I can't imagine anybody professing to be an atheist and going on, to forums and talking about atheism and they never heard of Oppie. That blows my mind. It just blows my mind. That's like saying I'm a PhD in physicist. Who is Einstein? What? I never heard. Who's Newton? I never heard of these guys.
No, I definitely get what you're stating, but I think the first thing is that within philosophy, there's a lot of rigor that comes with it, and you need to really delve into it in order to understand. And a lot of individuals, they hear philosophy and their eyes gloss over.
Science is philosophy. It's literally the philosophy.
You're absolutely right. But the thing is that there's a difference, because when people hear semantics, right, they think, well, you're not really trying to explain anything in a sense. You're just trying to play a semantic game, which is going to confuse everybody in a sense and miss them from the point. But the real truth is that the semantics is needed in a sense.
I agree. Yeah, and people say, "Oh, I wrote a blog on this. Semantics is not what you think it is," because people are like, "Oh, that's a semantic argument." And I mean, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it is. People a lot of times say I have a semantic argument when it's not. But when I do, I'm like, "Yeah, that's awesome. Semantics are cool. Let's talk about the semantic issues here." But they think for some reason it's pejorative. Oh, that's a semantics, because that's the colloquial understanding. It's trivial. It's pettifogging. No, semantics is actually pretty damn important, especially in structural approaches and formalism to science and philosophy. By the way,
absolutely.
Price had made a comment, and again, this is what I'm saying when people take something that I say and twist it a little bit, and I don't think it was on purpose. But what I said was, I didn't say you needed, if you take the atheist label, you have to know what philosophical atheism is or anything about atheism. What I said was, you take on the label, then you go into these forums and panels and start talking about atheism. Then you need to know something about it. There's a huge difference to be said. Difference there.
Absolutely, but at the same time, I think, because a lot of times when I do state things, I kind of state them in like a general sense. Right. I didn't mean to say that you meant what I stated. What I wanted to say was that sometimes, because you stated when people go onto a forum and then they don't know who Graham Oppie is or who these other philosophers are within who are arguing on atheology. And that's why I brought that up, being like, because a lot of individuals aren't read up on philosophy. Yeah. So yes, they get into the battlefield, but majority of the time they're more into either the psychological aspects of religious
or biblical theology. Yeah,
exactly.
Which I'm not. You don't look. I can't tell you. If somebody tells me the last time I ever got involved in a Bible argument, I couldn't even remember. It's been so long. Why? Because I don't know anything about the Bible. I don't claim to. I have no interest in the Bible. And so I don't go on panels and so, let's talk about, 1 Corinthians 12:6, what the Greek to the Latin, it's no interest to me. None. And so I don't do it because I don't know anything about it and I just don't want to. But if I started going, like, for example, Dr. Josh, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely one of the most brilliant men around on these particular subjects. Can you imagine like going on with his panels and start talking to him about his seriology and start talking to him about biblical stuff and he'll mention like the book of John. You're like, what's that? Or the Gnostic Gospels. You're like, what's that? So it's like, are you really at that point you're having a discussion with somebody? No, you're not, because you haven't done any of the basic groundwork. And that's what I'm talking about. The people that are saying they're atheists. Okay. Anybody can say they're atheist, but they're out there on these forums representing atheism, and then when you ask about atheism, they're like, what is there to know? that crushes my soul.
That I actually agree with when they're kind of just state that, okay, this is what it says in the Merriam-Web dictionary of what atheism is, and after they kind of end stop there.
And then I give another thing by Merriam-Webster that says differently, and they're like they have cognitive dissonance at that point. You know, it's like Merriam-Webster says on one place one thing, but if you actually look at how it says agnostic and atheism, it actually says atheism. The simplest explanation of atheism or an atheist is, or atheism is the belief that God does not exist. It says right there. This is from Merriam-Webster. So they go, well, why does it say one thing in one place and one in another? Because they're descriptive.
Right. Exactly.
That's why. Okay. So I know we got about 20 minutes.
Right.
Can we bring up those?
Bring up your
yeah, I want to bring them up if we can.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know how long you guys do your show for, but.
Oh no, it's just because. Oh, sorry.
I mean, I got no plans. It's just my cough. But okay, so these, if you want to go through these, Josh, one by one, and then kind of maybe see if you agree with the style that I see from certain people that are in these Facebook groups. And again, I will say straight out: Atheist Community of Austin, Atheist Republic, American Atheist, and the Atheist Experience. These are the people that are in those types of groups and representing those groups. These are the fallacies I see often, and I'm certain people have as well. I can't not be the only one. In fact, I know they're not because I talk to people a lot. But I'm just wondering, maybe the people that are watching, have they ever experienced any of this?
Yeah. So first one, argumentum ad meme, 100%. But
that's an easy one.
Yes.
Well,
but at the same time, I have to say that I think is just predominantly like I hope that they don't believe that using a meme is going to justify their argumentation. I think what they try to do is do it for fun, in a sense, or to aggravate.
Trolling. Yeah, maybe they might be trolling, but you know, when I ask somebody to have an argument and they just give me a meme, that's not a response. First of all, you're using somebody else's words. Use your big boy words. You know, one thing that when I came on the scene and I was learning about this stuff, and it was only about 10 years ago, I even started learning about philosophy. It wasn't until I would say maybe 4 years ago where I started, maybe longer, that I started added to the body of work, that started adding to the dialogue, right? Because I reached the level, I was like, okay, I think I understand this stuff. Let's make my own arguments. Some fail, some don't. You test them out, right? But I use my own words based upon other people's works. It's all derivative. I mean, come on, nothing's de novo when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Agreed.
Yeah. But you don't see that with the new Atheist TMs. They have nothing to add to the body of dialogue. Anybody can throw out a meme. Who cares? That's not somebody I'm going to have a conversation with. I want to have somebody that says, "Oh, your logic is wrong. Let's explain why." Not, "Oh, here's a meme." That's base level. This again, these are fruit on the ground. These are people that anybody can do this stuff. It doesn't take any knowledge to do any of this stuff.
Good
for
point.
Made it into a meme.
They fail to understand simple arguments, but argue you're wrong.
Correct.
That I have seen. Yes.
Absolutely. Have you seen it with me? Because that happens like daily.
I have. I definitely like on your show and stuff when people come in to try to like.
Oh God!
Take your points or take you up on your arguments, and then after, I've seen it.
Okay, good. All right. So one, I think that's not even contested.
Yeah. Okay. Do not understand very simple logic. Yes, I would agree with that, but at the same time, I think too, because either they're new or because they don't put a lot of onus into logic in and of itself. I kind of give them a pass on that. The only thing that I don't give a pass on is if you're going to argue logic and utilize logic when you're not informed on logic.
Right. And by the way, all my stuff is freshman level. All my logic that I do is intro to logic stuff. I don't go anything beyond that. One, I just don't have the skill set to do it. And you don't need it. I mean, there are very advanced forms of logic. Obviously, there's diatheistic logic and paraconsistent logic and fuzzy logic, multi-value logic, and they're all fascinating. Modal logic, which I happen to find very fascinating. And I do maybe use a little modal logic. But I mean, these are still all entry levels of those different types of logic, right? You don't need to have a profound understanding of logic to do the stuff that I do, because I don't claim to. But again, when they say, "Oh, you're wrong," and then you say, "Okay, well, you know, is it not valid or sound?" And they say, "Well, what do you mean valid or sound?" You're like, you know, where do you go from there?
Right, right. I see what you mean.
So yeah,
Do not understand very simple epistemology. That I can't say I've actually seen, but I think it's because the groups that I hang around with predominantly try to uh reach for that angle in a sense, like try to argue epistemologically.
just to know what the word means, right? That's a start.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm not sure. Have you had these issues a lot of times when you were within atheist groups on Facebook or Twitter?
Talk about me or James?
Well, I'm talking to you, Steve.
Oh,
Have you
yeah.
had-
Oh, daily. Yeah, I mean,
Oh, daily. Okay.
yeah, I mean, just about look when you have people telling me, okay, first of all, I love when they say things like you don't know the difference between knowledge and belief, and I'm like, I have a blog on this. I write an epistemological blog. I think I understand the basics. Okay, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I do understand knowledge versus belief. Okay, I do understand. I can ask them questions too, like, well, do you understand the value problem? Do you know the conditions for knowledge? Do you know? Do you know how to express this in logical notation? They wouldn't know any of that, but I don't know the difference, obviously. Or worse, when they say, oh, well, knowledge isn't a subset of belief. I'm like, okay, well, which theory of knowledge are you using? What do you mean theory of knowledge? That's science. I'm like, no, there's theories of knowledge and philosophy too. And so that drives me nuts because like, okay, if you want to use a pragmatic or more of probably a Tarski semantic theory where knowledge doesn't have to be a subset of belief, you can work with this semantically. But generally speaking, as far as like a theory of knowledge that's pretty much everybody uses for philosophy, it's going to be justified true belief. And so, and then I'll explain to them why knowledge of this subset of belief, showing a Venn diagram. I'll say, does it even make sense to say? And then even I'll appeal to their common sense. If I said, Josh, if I said to you, I know 1 + 1 = 2, but I don't believe it. Is that seems? I mean, does it not strike a chord with you going, something doesn't sound right?
Oh,
but that's right, exactly. But they'll still argue, well, I can know something to be true and not believe it. Well, yeah, but think about what you're saying to the theist. This is why theists jump on this stuff and think that, the atheists are so incompetent in epistemology, because they'll say things like that. Oh, I know evolution is true. I don't just believe it. No, I should say that. They'll say, I know evolution is true. I don't believe it. Or something like, I don't believe evolution is true. I know it.
Right. Something, yeah, I have heard that one.
Yeah. Before. Oh, that drives me nuts. It's like, so I just want to clarify here, and I'll do this all the time in Facebook groups. I want to clarify here. You know evolution is true, but you don't believe it. Well, that's not what I said. No, that's literally what you said. That's literally what you said. Oh, you're twisting my words. No, I'm not. You said, I know evolution is true, but I don't believe evolution is true. I know it. And they're like, well, I didn't say I didn't believe it. Well,
yeah, I see what you mean. Anyways. I see what you mean. Actually, James, how about you? Have you seen these type of things happen that are within the list so far that I've mentioned in groups that you've been involved in?
Every group with every discussion theme across every spectrum. It has absolutely nothing to do with atheists. It has nothing to do with any category like thought. You pick a category, pick a theme.
But that's the point, though. But that's the whole point. This could apply to everybody. This applies to creationism. This applies to flat earthers. Right. No, I've argued the same thing. But what my whole point is that you have atheists doing the same thing that they are. That's what it is. The Atheism TM is exactly what you just said. It can apply to creationists, proving my point that if you have atheists doing this kind of stuff, they're no different than the creationists. So you're literally supporting exactly what I said.
Right. Well, I'm not arguing with you. So sure.
Yeah. And you're right, though. You're right. That's the whole point. The fact that these apply, most of them, not all of them, but the four horsemen probably wouldn't apply to creationists. But for the generally speaking, and again, these are descriptive; they're not prescriptive. But generally speaking, most of these would apply to just about any other group where you have some kind of radicalization of beliefs, and they're not having honest engagements. Yes.
Well, I don't know if I want to say not honest. I think that most of them, honest speaks to intent, and you're probably going to tell me I'm wrong about that too. So skipping fast ahead so you can't.
I agree.
All right. Very good. So, I mean, are they bringing a dishonest intention to the stage when they do these things? Sometimes, but I think that's usually not the case, and I think that it's usually pretty hard to be sure, and this happens in for theists too. A lot
Of
of times,
course.
somebody will ask me, they'll like, here's this fundamentalist Christian making these arguments, and somebody will ask me, does he really believe in that shit he's saying, or is he just pretending to believe in that?
Yeah, Poe.
And,
Yeah.
and, and my answer is I don't know if they really believe that, or if they're lying, if they're being
Mm-hmm.
deceptive or not, because usually you can't tell, right?
No, I agree.
And I tend to favor charitable interpretations of everyone across the board whenever I can afford to be. So,
well, that's what I do. I initially, again, the cooperative principle. But when I start asking them questions and they don't answer my questions, or worse, I've had people, their response to me is, well, you can't prove your sky daddy exists. I'm like, I'm not a theist, you idiot. I mean, that's the retort to me. At that point, I'm not dealing with somebody who's honest. I just chuck them out the window of somebody who has an honest interlocutor. You're done at that point with me.
So right? I see that a lot too. Yeah. People assume if they hear a certain talking point, especially with a certain kind of like a almost combative energy, if they hear a certain talking point from somebody, and it's what they normally hear, what they usually hear from people in a certain demographic, right? And then they do unfairly, unreasonably assume that you're part of that demographic just because you use that talking point. And I have to be really careful with the circles that I run with, like in what they call the atheist community, because if I'm not really, really careful, for example, on topics of gender, if I'm not super careful with how I use my words, then somebody who's new to that scene will automatically assume that I'm some bigoted.
It happened to me on Twitter yesterday,
Christian or something like that, because
100%.
It's that whole the way the language resonates in their head. So yeah, I would see that all the time. What I think would be fun, and I wish we had time for this now, is for you to ask me questions that kind of parse out where I'm at, because you do use language a little bit differently than I do, and you're coming from a completely different experiential and perceptual paradigm. So I'm wondering, and I have the same question about like my politics. Somebody recently asked me, where do I land in the political spectrum? And the more I think about it, the less sure I am. And I think that that's going to be the case too with the way you use words. Like I'm not even sure where I am on that spectrum.
All right. Well, I could do that with you. We don't have to address all of them. Could you just read the other ones out real quick? So
okay.
And this is
yeah, sure. We can definitely do
just
that.
Just read them out, and then the audience can talk about it after the.
Got you. All right, Wes. Let's finish off the note. Perfect. So
run through
insist dogmatically that they are correct, regardless of any and all evidence to the contrary. That is true, I think. I do agree with that. Deny logic when it does not suit their position. I haven't ran into that one. Quote the Four Horsemen or American atheists over peer-reviewed academic citations and or journals and think that is sufficient evidence for a philosophical claim. 8, have pretty much never read a philosophical paper in their lives.
That one's true, by the way. And the only one they ever read is SEP, right? They read Draper. And then, it's funny, they'll cite SEP because, and by the way, the reason Stanford article it got so prevalent is because I used it a lot. I'm not the only one, obviously, but I mean, I really heavily use Stanford. And a lot of people before I started using it never even they never brought Stanford Encyclopedia up in these arguments. But they've read Draper's paper and then they misquote it, they misunderstand it, and then I'll say, "Well, what do you think Draper means here?" And they're like, "Who's Draper?" Okay. Anyways, go on. So we just get it out of the way.
All right. 9, use mute, boot, and min block ghosting when shown to be wrong. That I have dealt with. I've absolutely dealt with.
Theists do that too, by the way. Creationists and other people have done that as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah. All the groups have done this, I find.
Have you met Darth Dawkins? Okay.
Oh,
I know you have. I'm just
right. And 10, attacks a person's character to try to diminish their argument when they can't actually show that person's argument to be wrong, mostly because they don't understand it and or have no evidence to support their position.
And that's the biggest one. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get this read out. And
sure.
You could take it down. The reason being is because you see a lot of people in the atheist community, when I bring up these types of arguments, and they don't have the knowledge to refute them or try to, they attack credibility. I am slandered and defamed more than probably anybody on YouTube sometimes. I mean, the history of my channels. You've seen probably what I've been through. I mean, I had a 2.5-year lawsuit, for God's sake, I mean, that not a lot of YouTubers go through a 2.5-year lawsuit. Now, yes, I won $115,000 and I'm still trying to collect, and I got my channel back, but I mean, it should never happen. But it happened because people were trying to character assassinate me in support of a bullshit narrative that somebody was trying to run. And it came out later. Yes, they were lying. And I was telling the truth the entire time. But the atheist community, instead of going where the facts were, instead of being the skeptics they purport to be, they just believed the person by fiat. And they didn't ask for any evidence, even though I had all of it, and then try to smear me because I had all the evidence. And then after it came out that I was right and I won and all this other stuff, and the other person lied to the court, submitted false evidence, the atheist community was completely silent.
That's one thing, because even
Disgusting
for me,
is what it was.
I would agree with that. And I think because for me, I'm somebody who looks at the law, and until something is actually judged as has been stated that it has happened, I'm not going to come up with, well, this person did it because this is how I think or whatever. No, until the evidence shows itself.
But you would also see evidence that was like, if you look at evidence and you say, oh, look, this has been edited, this has been photoshopped, that's evidence.
Big time.
Absolutely. Or when like, a prominent atheist is streaming to my channel when it's a cease and desist, when the hostile took it over. And I'm like, hey, you're streaming to my channel here. This is, come on. Oh, well, you're in the wrong here. Oh, okay. Then if I'm in the wrong, this, and this, and they're like, oh, well, we don't care. It just blew my mind how unskeptical the atheist community was when all that happened with my show, because they were so entrenched on not having an atheist look bad, which was my partner, that they had to do whatever it took to try to smear me. And it was just bizarre. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. Never in my life. I have never had my honor or my integrity questioned until I came on YouTube. I mean, real simple. I was a 6-year Navy vet. I did 3 tours in the Gulf. I had 4.0 evaluations, maybe a 3.8 here and there. I had a good conduct medal. Never had an issue, but I mean, I get on YouTube and all of a sudden atheists are coming after me worse than the theist. Not all of them. There are some very dishonest theists out there, but it's brutal, man. But anyways, thanks for putting those out there, and people can review them on, the Absolutely. Convenience. All right. So James, you want me to ask you some questions?
Oh, also, I think that because I got with somebody wrote me in the back and stated that there have been individuals that did use Stanford beforehand, including Matt Dillahunty and everything. Like,
I don't know if Matt really did he?
I'm not going to lie. I haven't necessarily watched the Atheist Experience.
I started using it
a long time.
8 years ago.
Well,
here's the thing. Let me ask you this. How many peer-reviewed papers have you ever seen Matt Dillahunty cite in philosophy and atheism? And I'm not counting Stanford. Other than Stanford, 0. I've never heard him. And maybe he has, but I certainly never have heard him.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyways, all right. Well, is he there, James?
Okay, go ahead, James.
All right. So what wanted me to ask you questions about what, your epistemological framework or what?
Yeah, like the religious version of a political test to see where I'm at on the spectrum.
What do you describe yourself as?
I don't really. I don't have anything that I call a god. I don't think that the supernatural is even a legitimate concept.
So you would say you're a non-theist then?
Definitely not a theist by any definition I'm aware of.
So non-theist would be appropriate for that, right? Okay. So when people do talk about the supernatural claim, some kind of deity exists, you don't hold the position there is none, or do you hold it because supernaturalism is just so foreign to you that anything that would be in that set just by fiat doesn't exist? So there is no being that exists that controls the universe.
Oh, I have no opinion about whether or not there's an intelligent being that controls the universe. I just don't accept the supernatural as a legitimate irrational concept. And if someone were to convince me that there is a necessary being that precedes the universe, that must have by intention authored the universe and anything beyond that even, and then they would, I suppose, assume that now they've convinced me that a God exists. But my position would be, no, you've just convinced me now that there's a creative entity behind the universe or authoring it, that's not a god to me. And the distinction that I would make is that I'm not impressed, right? It'd be like, a dog poops on the ground and you can call that the dog a chef if you want to, but I'm like, I'm not eating
semantics.
that.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
that's a pejorative version of semantics. That's not the good kind. But yes, you're right.
right.
So your position is more of a fence sitter. Then you don't have position on either way, as far as. And by the way, you do accept that a necessary being doesn't have to be a god, right? Necessary beings is just something that must exist in all possible worlds. Quantum fluctuations could be a necessary being.
Well, I would consider myself a necessary being.
Whoa,
because I'm a determinist.
really?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're a fatalist?
Yeah, well, you can call it a fatalist if you
Okay,
want.
but
I just
even
think it was unavoidable that I would end up existing exactly as I am, and I subscribe as a probability, not a certainty, or not. I don't have a sense of conviction about this, but I suspect that the B theory of time is correct. Block time, right?
I go with B theory, but the issue I'm having is that in possible worlds, when you say you're a necessary being, that means that you must exist in all possible worlds. There cannot be a possible world where you fail to exist, and that just is incoherent. There clearly is.
I only know about this world.
Well, yeah, no, this is the extant world. This is the actualized world. But in other possible worlds, your parents didn't meet. There's no necessary reason why your parents had to meet. In some other world, they didn't meet. Correct?
If you're defining necessary being as a being that's necessary for this universe, then that's what I am. If you're going beyond that, then I'm not a necessary being.
A necessary being is understood as something that must exist in all possible worlds. Any counterfactual world that exists, there has to be this entity. For example, x equals x I hold as a priori knowledge that must exist all possible worlds. There's not a possible world that cannot exist, right? So I call that a necessary being. You are, on the other hand, there are possible worlds where you failed to exist. Your parents didn't meet. There's a counterfactual condition. There's a counterfactual.
I don't exist. Yeah. I don't exist on Mars. I don't exist on the moon.
No. I don't know. Maybe we're having an incongruent in the semantics of the terminology. Possible world theory deals with sets that exist for counterfactuals, what ifs. They're called subjunctive cases. A subjunctive case is a what if case, a hypothetical case, a contingent case, or it should be a counterfactual case. So in some other world, your name may not have been James. It may have been something else. I mean, you can get what called cryptes rigid designators, but you existing in some counterfactual world means that in that particular world, your parents never met. That's probabilistically that could have happened. Therefore, that possible world, you don't exist. You're contingent, meaning that you exist in at least one possible world, but not all of them. You are contingent because you exist in this possible world, which is actualized, but you don't exist in all possible worlds. So I could never support the argument you're a necessary being.
That's fine. I don't know that there are other possible Earths, if that's what you mean. I don't know that there are or aren't other possible Earths, but that's fine.
What's reality itself? I mean, but again, these possible worlds don't have to have ontology, right? I mean, unless you're what's called a modal realist, which I'm not. But modal anti-realist just uses these as just conceptual things. A possible world is a conception, right? It's not actualized. It's not real. There's no ontology to it. But in some possible world, I don't exist. Okay, but that isn't a world that actually has actualization. And by the way, actualization means indexical, means only our world. If somebody did live in an alternate possible world that did exist, actually had ontology, to them that would be their actualized or possible world. But a modal anti-realist like myself, we don't hold that those actually exist. It's just these are concepts only.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
But anyways, I'm way in the weeds here. But okay, so the reason what I was getting at is you kind of hold the position that I would have. I don't have a position on the God claim either. I'm called an agnostic, right?
Okay.
Now, Josh here, he holds the position there are no gods. Right? We don't have the same view. It's good. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But my argument has been, why would you want the same word? Not you particularly, but people that are promoting atheism. Why would they want the same word to describe two different positions? Because there's 4 epistemic possibilities. 3 of them are rational. Let's see if you agree. Given any proposition, you can believe it. You can disbelieve it, which means to believe false, contrary to what Matt Dillahunty tells you. He's wrong. It means to believe false. You can go read the literature on that. It's called Frege reductionism, or Frege rejectionism. So you believe false. If you suspend judgment, you believe neither, or you can believe both, which I think both of us would agree would be an epistemic contradiction. So if you believe true in both, its proposition is true, and you believe it's false, it's kind of an epistemic contradiction. So there's only 3 rational positions: believe, disbelieve, suspend judgment. Would you agree with that?
Tentatively, I'm going to say sure. For the sake of argument, I agree with that.
Fine. Okay. I hold the position that I hold in either. Josh holds a position that the proposition of theism is false. Why would we want the same word for that? It makes no sense. I agree. And
Right.
so the lacktheists out there, what they do is they say, well, but you still both don't believe in God. Yes, but his epistemic disposition believes that is false. Mine is suspend judgment. So I think it's more precise to have 2 different words that describe the nuance of those very 2 different positions, because I'm a fence sitter. He's not. Lacktheists are all fence sitters, by the way. Every lacktheist out there that says, I just lack a belief in God, that doesn't have a positive epistemic status, I hate to break it to you, I guarantee it, you are a fence sitter. You're just the same as me, same position, only you're calling it something else.
No, I'm not a fence sitter.
Yeah, I know. No. Well, you're not. So again, if you don't hold but the proposition, there is no God, you said you don't take a stance on it.
No, here's the thing. If we're talking about God in the way that you would normally describe it, the way Christians and Muslims and those people would describe it, my position is that there isn't one. And I'm going to tell you the reason why. Because I believe it's important to lead by example. And I believe that there are ethical responsibilities that come with the way that we use language and the way that we answer questions that are important in our society. If you're a parent and you have a child that comes home from school, let's say they're in 1st grade, so they understand the basics of language, but they have no clue about what the real world is or isn't. That they don't understand the limits of physics or history or anything else. So they come home from school and they are absolutely in tears. They are beside themselves with grief. They're in an absolute panic. You've never seen them this way before. Turns out that there are some kids at school that have this special club. There is a shadow monster, they say, and you need to join our club. Acknowledge that the shadow monster is real, or the shadow monster is going to come and get you and do really, really bad things. Now, we're going to protect you from the shadow monster. The shadow monster doesn't hurt people that are part of the club. So you need to accept that the shadow monster is real, right? And if you don't do that, you're in trouble. So join the club, take the vows, pay the dues, you're good. And they're eventually going to come for your parents too. So you might want to go home and warn them too. And so this is clearly a shakedown, right? Like the 1st grade version of a mob shakedown. Your 1st grader doesn't have a clue what's going on. They come home in tears. They ask you, is the shadow monster real? Now, you can take the 3 different positions. Do you take an affirmative, yeah, it's real? Do you take an I'm not sure because I technically can't prove it's not? Or do you take the affirmative, absolutely not, it's not real? To be a responsible parent, to be a leader in your family or in the community at large, to set the kind of example, you cannot afford an agnostic position. You cannot afford to take that position. So if there ends up being a shadow monster somewhere in the real world, at least you set the kind of example that sets your child up for better successes in life, because life is hard enough without superstitious, shadowy what ifs looming overhead in the way that they think. Now, this is what I see happening with theists for the most part in our world. This is the example that their parents failed to set for them, and this is the shadow that they live under and try to spread to everybody else, whether they realize that's what they're doing or not. So for the sake of being ethically responsible with the question, absolutely not. But if just between you and I, grown adults, no children in the room, you ask me if I think that there is some pre-existing super intelligence, the author of the universe, my answer is, seems pretty unlikely to me. I couldn't begin to fathom that there is. I can't say for sure that there isn't, right? But if a child walks into the room, my position switches to absolutely not.
I don't know. I find that to be questionable way approaching it, because to me, I'm consistent regardless. And there's 2 things that you said that I take umbrage with. One, I agree with you. That particular monster doesn't exist. I'm on record. I have said hell doesn't exist the way the Catholics and the Christians promote it. I think that's complete nonsense. I think hell was created to scare people, to be convinced of a certain belief. I'm against all that stuff. I think classical theism is false. Okay, but when you're talking about the an omniscient God or something that existed for the universe and like that, I take this as a suspend position. That is what my agnostic is based upon. Global, not local. Global. You're local atheist, but globally it sounds like you're more agnostic. But I think Joshua would probably say, no, there's no such being that created anything, right? He takes a lot stronger approach. But you also said something that, yeah. See, so I think there should be different terms for our positions. But I think what you said was, I have to suspend judgment. I can't prove it. Why? Suspending judgment should not be based upon what you can prove or disprove. That's insanity. That's logical positivism. That went out in the 30s, right? What your belief should be based upon is, can you justify it? Justification does not have to be on what you can prove. There's a lot of things I can't prove that I still believe. There's a lot of things that I cannot justify that I still believe. We all have properly basic beliefs, right? We all have things called hinge commitments, what Wittgenstein would call them, or I like to call them faith-based commitments because it drives atheists crazy, but that's what they are. They're faith-based commitments. We all have these properly basic beliefs that are not justifiable. They're not warrantable. They are taken by faith that we all have to function in reality, in society. And you can't justify them. They certainly can't be proven, but you have to believe them to be a rational agent, from which rationality is built upon. So when you say I have to suspend judgment because I can't prove it, I think that's a dangerous way to go down for a sound epistemology and sound rationalization. What you should say is, I suspend judgment because I don't have sufficient evidence either way to really make an informed decision. That's cool. I can accept that. That's evidential approach to agnosticism, what's called evidential agnosticism. I got no issue with that. Okay. But it's not what you can prove, because that's, we don't prove things. To believe them. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Anyways,
no, but in the meantime, I've never heard a good argument from a Christian theist or Muslim theist.
Probably why you're not a theist, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've never heard a good argument.
Yeah.
For
here's the thing. I don't think people are converted to theism by argumentation very much. I think people are converted to theism because of social pressure, and I think that they instill in themselves a belief because of things they try to connect the dots, right? That when I became a theist, and I'm no longer a theist, but I did become a theist for a while, I was connecting dots, right? I was like, how do all these things, come together? Well, I was, going to church groups, and they were telling me, oh yeah, it's God, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, okay, it's God. And so I think a lot of theists, many of them at least, don't really turn to theism because of argumentation. Now, the higher ones, maybe, right? The people that really know the theist arguments, they might be convinced by those arguments. But the average theist and the average atheist don't even really know what a lot of the arguments are. If you ask the average atheist or theist what Plantinga's modal ontological argument is, they're not going to be able to tell you. And True, that's one of the stronger arguments to defeat.
True, but I think if somebody laid the argument out in words that everybody in the room understands, that they could give you a real answer to it.
Yes and no. The two arguments that I find to be the most challenging are, one, the modal ontological argument, and anybody who says, "Oh, that just defines God's in existence," has never looked at the modal logic. That's just wrong. And two, what's called the argument from contingency. They don't get you to God. They don't deductively prove there's God. Okay, I don't think any proof can do that. But it's what's called abductive or inductive argument, or it's okay, this is at least giving me a reason to believe the possibility exists, and this is a decent, strong argument, or a good argument. It doesn't have to be strong, but a good argument, and that might be sufficient for somebody. They might say, this reaches my level of why I think I'm justified to believe there's a God. It's not for me, because I do know the arguments, and I don't think even the argument from contingency, I don't think it gets you to God. It does lay a really good, solid argument for why necessary being more likely is the case. I will give it that, but that doesn't get you to God. And even then, I don't accept necessary being either. I go to prove fact because I'm lazy. Seriously, I'm not even joking. There's really three things about the universe: infinite regression, brute fact, or necessary being. There's really no other possibility that I can think of.
Or it can be cyclical as well, but I guess that would be...
That's going to be necessary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, it all kind of reduces into one of those three categories.
I mean, a cyclical universe could you could have a cyclical universe as the brute fact, right? It just keeps recycling itself, and then time only has meaning inside the context.
Yeah, but the brute fact, the brute fact basically means is there's no way to ever understand this. There's no way to ever get an answer. It is just so beyond our epistemic limit, and it just is what it is, right? There's no explanation for it. But the problem with the brute fact is it doesn't satisfy principle of sufficient reason. which I don't really hit you anyways. But the argument contingency is set up on PSR. And so infinite regression doesn't satisfy PSR.
Sure.
Brute fact doesn't satisfy PSR. Necessary being does. But then it leads into other questions of like, oh, okay, does God as a necessary being satisfy PSR? No, I don't think it does. And so the argument contingency fails to get you to God, but it does make a really strong argument if you accept the PSR for a necessary being.
God only pushes the problem back, honestly, because if there is a God that's always existed as a sentient being, then it's always been having thoughts. Thoughts are, by definition, events that happen in a sequence.
Oh, okay,
So-
yes, but the problem you run into is we're talking about local space-time, right? And within our universe, spatial temporal with respect to us. There are versions of a level 2 multiverse and level 3 multiverse where there's isolated universe from us that are causally distant. They have no relationship to us. They have their own
Sure.
time. And so
Sure.
if those universes can exist that are spatial temporarily isolated from us, some God could exist in some, omni universe. And I asked
Sure.
Dr. Ross that question. Do you accept A theory of time or B theory of time? I tend to B theory. William McRae tends to A theory because it helps his Kalam argument. But
yeah, Craig admits that he needs A theory to
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, he's not wrong. Yeah, no, he's absolutely right on that. He needs A theory for his arguments. But Dr. Ross's response was like, he believed in G theory of time. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, God time. I was like, that's actually a good answer. I don't have to accept it, but it's cheeky. It was cheeky.
So if God exists in its own in whatever that is, and I don't even think the term God is legitimate, to be honest. I think that Epicurus is right about this, because if it has limits, if it either doesn't want to prevent so much evil, or it doesn't have the ability to prevent so much evil. I mean, one way or the other, like, why are you calling it God?
I get that. That's the evidential problem, evil, and I get that. I think Epicurus is right on that. I think that the evidence. I'll leave you guys with this because I know we got to wrap it up. For an atheist to justify atheism, because I had a lot of atheists say, "Oh, well, I can't say there's no God because I can't justify it." Why not? It's not that hard to justify. And so they're pretending to be, suspending judgment when they actually really, I think, believe there's no God. Here's how you justify it. Take a bunch of arguments for atheism. Go read Mackey, go read Oppie, go read Drange, go read Draper, and then say, oh, look, holistically, all these arguments combined, the probability is sufficient for me just low based upon low priors and theoretical virtues that Oppie would argue that, yeah, there is no God. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how you justify it. The evidential problem evil is one of the best arguments for that approach. That and divine hiddenness.
Sure.
That's how you justify atheism.
I would definitely agree with that. I think that does have,
Thank you.
Definitely, I would say that even Michael Martin is pretty good when it comes to atheology and arguing based on.
Yeah, Martin has good stuff.
So,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and Martin at least Martin agreed with negative atheism to a point, but he still thought Flu's argument was problematic. He thought some arguments. Yeah, and Martin actually, and a lot of people don't realize this, and we'll get to this next time, the burden of proof, which people have rallied against me on for so long, even though I am right, but whatever. Martin even argued that negative atheism or lack of belief atheism requires justification to be rational. He argued this, and he was a proponent of lack of belief atheism. So when anybody says, well, I don't have to rationalize my lack of belief, I don't have a burden of proof, you've never looked at the burden of proof then, because there's multiple different types of burden of proof. At least 6 that come to mind. 6 different types of burden of proof. There's no such thing as one burden of proof.
Right. So my position is, and has always been for many years now, that it's not even possible that a being worthy of the title exists.
Yeah.
So
that's an axiological value claim. That
is exactly what that is. It's a values claim.
Sure.
So somebody else can feel differently about it, and then sure.
That's one of the arguments against God too. That actually is a legitimate argument against God. Is the axiological, if such a God existed, is it worthy of worship? Right.
Exactly.
Well, here's the irony: any being worthy of worship would refuse to be worshipped.
Yeah. I mean, again, a holistic approach. This is what I'm saying. Atheists out there, if you want to justify the belief there's no God, there are ways to do it, but you have to do the legwork. And I see a lot of people saying, yes, divine hiddenness. And by the way, the logical problem of evil is only good for the triomni God, because it's called an incoherent, inconsistent system. Not all the properties and
you can't be all three.
Oh, true. I'd say, yeah, they can't. They can't all be 4. There's 4 propositions. They can't all be true at the same time. But the evidential problem of evil, it may not be as airtight as a logical one, but it is certainly wide enough to say, look, if this omnibenevolent God exists, and evil exists and it's allowed, then there is no such thing that it cannot be all good. There either has to be a God that exists, has a little bit of evil in him, or there's no such thing as God. And that's how you justify positive atheism. Not hard to do. I don't know why atheists are so scared of burden of proof. They just run from it.
I would completely agree. Now, because we need to wrap up, I do want to give both of you last statements. So, Steve, do you want to state anything?
Yeah.
Like last statement?
Yeah. By the way, thanks, Josh, for this opportunity. I do like talking about this stuff. I'm glad that there's people coming around nowadays. You're finding that are welcoming these types of ideas because they were so shunned in the atheist community years ago, but now people are changing their minds. A lot of people are changing their minds. Even like I said, Matt Dillahunty, because of my arguments, doesn't assign himself the sobriquet or no, obviously the moniker of agnostic atheist. Right? He doesn't take that label anymore. He thinks it's nonsensical, and I've demonstrated ad nauseum that it's nonsensical. And if people want to talk to me about it later, that's fine. But the atheist community is getting away from the new atheist approach. They're getting away from the atheist community of Austin. They're seeing the schisms that have happened in there. They've seen the approach, the militant approach. I mean, like you had pointed out, James, God forbid you say something against the established rules of what they consider to be gender or something like that. I had that problem on Twitter the other day. I took biology. In biology, I hold the human species only has two biological sexes, male and female. It doesn't mean you can't have gender expression. It doesn't mean intersex doesn't exist. Intersex still falls into one or the other. You can show this by talking about chromosomes and Klinefelters and Turners and all these different syndromes. And I'm somehow being attacked for that now, and yet I talk to biologists that agree and disagree. So there's some controversy there. So if there's some controversy there, there's probably reasons why there's controversy, right? You can't just say, hey, look, you're an asshole because you believe a different way. That's not addressing the controversy, right? And I see the atheist community using these same bullish tactics they did 5 years ago against me when I started bringing up all this stuff against atheism. I was vilified. I was, this is why Chris from Hereticals calls me the atheist devil. I was Satan to them because I talked about things that they didn't talk about on their channel. They didn't want known. They hid from their subscribers and their listeners. And I thought that was so disingenuous. But again, so many more atheists are coming out now going, yeah, there's no God. Let me tell you why. Rather than, I just don't believe you. So,
sure.
Thank you, Josh.
Sure.
Thank you. And James, do you want your last statement?
Oh, I mean, there are so many different rabbit holes we could have gone down through tonight. I mean, a lot of it I simply wasn't qualified to speak to. Some of it I was, but they were kind of side issues. I think that the term God is a bigger problem for theists or for self-identified theists than it is for atheists. Because if you have one theist in a room and they say something like "Praise God," and the other 9 are going to say "Hallelujah, Amen," like I totally agree. And they have this sensation that they've just shared this literally meaningful moment, but they haven't, right? Because they each have this different idea. One's a Jehovah's Witness, one's a Catholic, one's a Mormon, one's a Westboro Baptist, one's a pantheist. Like you have all these different ideas about who and what God is, and it's like it doesn't get them anywhere. It just creates this illusion of something meaningful shared between them. And I think putting that much importance on it is also destructive for reasons we don't have time to get into tonight. But I don't really mind it. Like, I don't mind that somebody holds ideas in their head, which I find problematic. It doesn't bother me that Nazis exist in terms of the way people with those thoughts in their head, right? It bothers me that behaviors that come from that happen in our world, but just the idea that somebody has in their head doesn't bother me. If I found out that somebody held racist views or sexist views or anything else, but they weren't out there preaching it, they weren't out there abusing anybody with it, they kind of let me know on the down low, I'm not going to have this strong knee-jerk emotional reaction like kill it with fire, right? Like, let's get a lynch mob going and let's take care of this problem. I'm going to be like, somebody that thinks differently than me, as long as they're not out there abusing anybody with this divergent idea, I couldn't begin to care that they have this other idea that I find troubling. And that's true and I feel the same way about Christians. I feel the same way about Nazis, feel the same way about, pick anybody, any view at all, as long as they're not out there hurting anybody with it, either by preaching it and trying to spread a bad idea or, abusing people in the name of that idea. I couldn't begin to care. and that's just where I am about it. So that's it.
Cool.
I just think
Good
that
discussion. I appreciate it. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So again, Steve, McRae, and James, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a fantastic discussion and very intriguing to delve into where I sat within the three distinctions. Because I do think that there are three distinctions. I don't think that there should be these plethora of other distinctions based on Gnostic theism, agnostic theism, Gnostic atheism, and agnostic atheism. I think that there are these three descriptors, and these three descriptors are still the best way to actually interact while dealing with this subject matter. People might disagree with me, and that is fine. I love when people disagree with me. I love it. But all in all, in the end, I just want to say thank you both for coming on. It was so fun. And everybody inside the comment section, thank you so much for listening to this show of the Guild of Inquiry. Please hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you next time.
Good night, guys.